Good morning and welcome in everyone to HogvilleNET YouTube Live. It's been a minute since I've been on. It's been over a week. I'm Kevin McPherson, and today we're just going to hit on a few little things here, a little recruiting. Been working on an article that I'm shortly to post to HogvilleNET, going into kind of the three big talking points right now for Arkansas men's basketball as the Razorbacks prepare to finish up non-conference play with a game on Monday against Oakland at home before jumping into the Friar against what's the most loaded conference I've ever seen in college basketball, the SEC, an 18-game slate that promises, to kind of keep you on the edge of your seat through the early stages of March. When you close out regular season play, there's a lot of subtext and subtopics, but I've kind of drilled down to three overviews, and I'm going to hit on those a little bit today after we talk recruiting. Do I think Cal is recruiting Sila hard? We're going to talk about that. And then we'll finish up with just a little brief preview of Arkansas versus Oakland. We know Oakland last year upset Kentucky in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Different team. This year, it's a team that's really struggled, 6 losses in a row. So we'll hit on a little bit of that. I think there might be a trap game element for the Razorbacks as the Hogs get ready to embark in this upcoming game on Monday. Again, that'll be your 13th and final non-conference game. This will be a non-conference slate where Arkansas is going to only have one quality win, and so everything else, a quad 1 win. So everything else outside of a couple of quad 2 losses has fallen into that Q3, Q4. Thankfully, Arkansas, even though they've had stumbles, not been clean throughout games, had to overcome some deficits, a perfect 9-0 in those games. 6-0 in quad 4. This will be another quad 4, so Arkansas looks to go to 7-0. So you've avoided some bad losses. Again, we're going to talk about the three overarching things with where the season is right now here in a few minutes. Let's start quickly with just an update. I don't have any really deep intel to give you on Mouhamed Sylla. Mo Sylla, the 6'10", 240-pound center, native of Dakar, who's been at Bella Vista Prep this season out in Arizona. We know Arkansas had him in kind of felt like a last-minute Sunday visit on December 1st. That was actually Thanksgiving weekend. Arkansas lost to Illinois on Thanksgiving Day. That was a Thursday. The football team lost to Missouri that Saturday in the regular season finale for football. And then on Sunday, the basketball team was hosting a visitor, then getting on the road the following day to Miami for that, going from Illinois and Kansas City to playing its first true road game in the ACC SEC challenge. The Hogs did, winning that game at Miami that kicked off this 5-0 winning streak, 5-game winning streak, all coming in the month of December. But going back to Sila, that's when Sila took his official visit. It was the final of 5 official visits that he took to the 5 finalists that he named, being Arkansas, Kansas, Washington, Oregon, and Georgia Tech. And we brought you a little bit of intel along the way. And one of the things I did was I speculated, because of the weird timing, right off a couple of weeks on the visit after the early signing period ended, plus getting things arranged so that he can get his visits out of the way on the heels of the ending of the early period, but potentially maybe no intel or insight. Maybe the timing of making a decision over the holidays or around that time could maybe lend itself to the idea or the notion that maybe he's going to reclass and come at semester. I mean, I don't rule that out. I don't have any information to suggest that's it, because otherwise he's got to wait to the spring to sign, yet he's getting this done now. By the way, I checked on this. Arkansas spring semester officially starts January 13th. Yesterday, Sila puts out, he's narrowed that final 5 to a final 3. It's no surprise at all who those 3 teams are. The last time I was on, a little over a week ago, I talked about Arkansas, Georgia Tech, and Oregon. I've mentioned several times that Kansas looked to be out of its own doing, kind of backed off because of NIL considerations that the Jayhawks want to shift maybe toward portal recruiting. I've talked about that on several segments going back to when we knew Sila was in play with the Razorbacks and coming on that visit. So that's been a talking point. I've always said I had a source that says keep an eye on Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech may be willing to spend the NIL money. They've kind of missed on some guys, and maybe this is a target they really go after. We talked about Oregon and Arkansas in the last segment, and Georgia Tech. I reminded everybody of that point about Georgia Tech. And then we talked about Arkansas having sent out Chin Coleman to see Sila in person last week in Las Vegas at the Tarkanian Classic. But who also was there was Dana Altman, head coach of Oregon. So you've got Arkansas associate head coach, and you have Oregon's head coach. So I'm not sure what to make of that, but we do know now that Sila has narrowed it down to the three that we just have been talking about the most, and it's those three. And so getting good source information, but it's not good enough to give me a full head of steam on where this lands. I mean, I really think if Arkansas and John Calipari are in the finals with any player and they get them on campus, it's advantage Calipari. But I've also always said this, and it remains true now, is that there will be limitations on where Arkansas will go in terms of NIL money for any player. They put evaluation on players. There may be a range there and some wiggle room for negotiation, but I do think that will play into this. I have a source that thinks that this could end up being a highest bidder situation. If that's the case, it doesn't mean Arkansas won't get the player, and it doesn't mean that Arkansas wouldn't get close enough if it's not the highest bidder, that everything else that comes along with playing for Calipari, which is some really great track record relative to the field Arkansas's competing against for this player on getting players to the next level, developing guys, and then seeing those guys have ultimate success at the next level. Players pay attention to that. So there may be a package of value there in concert with the dollar amount, the strict NIL dollar figures that helps Arkansas in that regard. So this is a recruitment that we've said for a while. A decision's likely to come around this time. Again, if this is a decision being made because he might make a jump at semester and reclass to 2024, in which case he could sign with the team, enroll in school, and then you could use him or just use him in practice, whatever. I'm not saying I have any indication that it's going that way. I do find the timing of this still odd. In fact, if you're going to wait till the spring until you can sign, Arkansas, why the rush then to get on campus and not do it on a weekend where you're hosting maybe one of your marquee SEC games, can have them in a little bit longer? Again, there may be other reasons why the player and his camp want to make a decision sooner rather than later. But at the end of the day, if he's not reclassing and coming on board at semester break, then he's going to have to wait till the spring anyway. And so can't sign anything until then. And now it's not letters of intent. We know that it's financial aid agreements. But Mouhamed Sylla, I've talked about this a lot. The number one center in the country, according to On3 Sports, that site has him ranked 13th overall, a 4-star, but pretty high level guy knocking on the door of 5-star status, according to that service. And then 247 Sports has consistent, I think for a while now, had him ranked 30th overall. So a 4-star, but not outside of that top 25, top 20 realm of a 5-star value. But either way you look at it, the guy's a top 3 or 4 center in the country. On3 says the best. And he's a more traditional guy in terms of most of his impact's going to be in that paint area around the rim, especially defensively. What I've always said I liked about him, just watching him, is his foot quickness. With all that length at 6'10", he's still growing, maybe 240, so a good frame. He's got agility, so he is an agile, mobile guy, but there's quickness, and he's light off his feet, and so it enables him to get out of his area to make plays defensively or rebound the basketball, maybe alter a shot or block a shot. So when you move that well, you're not just anchored to another big man. You can help off. You could do some things there. Offensively, on both sides of the ball, still very much a work in progress. But he has the traits and size and length and some of that agility and mobility, some of those things that you see even with guys who aren't stretching the floor with their offense and shooting skill, can still bring a lot to the table, because we see it throughout at every level. I mean, a Dan Gafford is a rim protector, an improving rebounder, a lob threat, and a guy that's going to shoot at a high percentage. Sila strikes me as a guy, although he's not at that level, could potentially be that kind of guy as he continues to move up at each stage of his career. And he's a guy that's been pursued again by a lot of big schools. We mentioned Kansas being in his final group, Washington. Those teams no longer in the mix now. So we'll see when a decision actually comes. It could be at this point. Usually, when the players narrow it down to a final three, it's a lot of times not very many days after that where a final decision comes down, and then we find out, is this somebody that's going to stick to, writing it out to the spring to sign? I mentioned a scenario before where potentially he might have signed something in the early period and then took his, let's say it was Arkansas, and he took the visit a few weeks later, and now just he's on a different timeline. That seems like the least likely option. Again, I have no idea if the midterm is something that could be real or not, but a decision is coming at a time where you still have a wait, if it's not that, several months to get into that mid-spring signing period. Will start around mid-April, excuse me, and it's usually 4 or 5 weeks, so that'll run into May because of the way the portal stuff works and changing from national letter of intent to now doing the financial aid agreements. Who knows what other changes are in there? But for right now, there are still 2 structured signing periods for high school players. It's that week-long early period in November that's passed, and then the 4 or 5 week one that's in the spring, starting around mid-April. So that's what we're keeping an eye on with Sila. If he commits to Arkansas, and it's not going to be something where he's quickly getting onto campus for some kind of a reclass and coming around at midterm. But again, I think I've mentioned this before. Arkansas has already got a top 5 rated recruiting class. When you look at Darius Heacup Jr., who's been going nuts in these holiday events, the City of Palms, co-MVP. Seems like every time you turn around, he's scoring, at least mid-20s to low 30s. He had a 38-point game, and he's consistently hitting game-winning shots and making game-winning plays at the end, proving why he's a top 5 rated 5-star as the lead guard, the number 1 point guard in the country. You've got Malik Thomas going off over at Overtime Elite, 6'4", 2 guard. These 2 bookends, 1 and 2 in your backcourt, both top 7 rated in the country, both 5 stars. You understand why Arkansas's class, even though it's a backcourt class, when you then throw in combo guard Isaiah Sila, a top 50-ish rated player out of Springdale, Arkansas, all of these guys committed and signed early, and Arkansas has a top 5 rated recruiting class just with backcourt players. Remember, Calipari's first high school class technically are the 3 guys he brought with him from Kentucky, all backcourt players. So Sila checks a couple of boxes for you if you get him. He'll be Calipari's first frontline signee out of the high school pledge from the high school ranks. So, you say, well, what does that matter? Arkansas did a pretty good job in the portal, keeping Brazil, you call that portal or retention, however you want to look at that, when you had a staff changeover. But I think Arkansas may, and I've said this several times, may need to revisit Calipari, this idea of going 8 or 9 deep in the full rotation, maybe expand that to 10 or 11. I've been talking about that for months, going back to the spring and summer before we even saw commitments in this class. I questioned the lack of depth, especially on the front line. Well, Sila helps you there. So even if he's not a guy that's immediately ready, you can still go get more veteran players out of the portal, but you've got a big body and a guy that has enough attributes to be ranked as highly as he is that can potentially help you as a freshman, and maybe not just help you, but be a significant part of what you're doing. Depends on how he progresses and how he fits, if you got him. But it makes sense to me why you're after him, and he would be your 4th guy in this class if it's Arkansas that he comes down on a decision with. And you've still got a 5-star like Nate Ament, a top 5 rated player, a 3-4 combo, I think, at the college level, more of a wing probably at the NBA level, but a versatile guy nonetheless in that class of 2025 who's carrying his recruitment through the spring. We don't know when a decision might be made. He'll definitely be signing in the spring unless he all of a sudden made a decision now and announced he's reclassing and doing something at semester. I don't see that happening. But Nate Ament would be a guy that you also continue to pursue. The same with Mika Murnin, in my view, class of 2026, top 10, top 5 rated 5-star in that class, who's considering strongly a reclass to 2025. So Arkansas's got options. We know Muirnin's already visited. Ament hasn't. Calipari's been out to see him a lot and visit him, including not that long ago. Back out to see him, I think it was the day after Arkansas beat Michigan in New York City. So what was that? That was on December 10th. The next day he was out. So that was just a few weeks ago. And Calipari's been out numerous times to see him in. So there's a lot of places where this recruiting can still go. Remember, the first class, only 3 players. This one, it's obvious to me that Calipari's looking to expand that because he's already got 3 locked in. And so one of the questions that came over is, well, then how serious is Arkansas about trying to wrap this up with Sila? I think very serious. Why else would you bring him in on campus and even rush it if you weren't serious on this timeline of a decision that seems to be coming fairly soon? I guess it could play out. We'll see, but the thought is maybe it's coming pretty soon. Why else would you continue to go out and see the player, which Arkansas did with associate head coach Chen Coleman just last week? To me, you're laying the groundwork for a pursuit of a player. And again, it always, to me, then comes back to these valuations on players. Calipari and Arkansas demonstrated in the first recruiting cycle, mostly portal, but again, 3 guys he brought with him from Kentucky, demonstrated with several players they were on that they weren't going to exceed certain limits they set on what they would pay players out of NIL. Arkansas's got plenty of NIL money, but at some point, you're spreading that around and you've got to determine where is the value here, and am I better off sinking this money somewhere else? That will be with any player, no matter how good. There are limitations and things that will exceed that. I think there are some programs that have been willing to maybe spend more than where they set evaluation for various reasons. Arkansas really hasn't been that team yet. So with Sila, that will apply. So that means even though Arkansas is serious about it, there is a stopping point. And so I'm not convinced that Arkansas is the final resting spot for Mouhamed Sylla. But now that the Razorbacks are in the final 3, like I expected, I've been saying, I'm mentioning Arkansas, Georgia Tech, Oregon the last time we were on. I've been saying that Arkansas would be there in the end. But does Arkansas want to be there to finish it out? I think it all comes down again to that NIL money. And does Sila see the value? And I've heard the $1 million figure thrown around with him. Just to kind of give a specific on that, I've not been able to confirm that. That's just something that's out there. All right, 17 minutes in, 17 and a half, we've really kind of covered the recruiting part. Let's move on now. We'll see what happens with Mo Sylla. We're going to jump right back on here for decisions made at any point in time. We're going to get back on here. By the way, I'm going to be at the King Cotton Holiday Classic this weekend, starting today. There's some really good players in this event. Springdale's playing, which means Isaiah Sila will be in this event. Benton, one of the top teams in the state. And we know Terrion Burgess, a top 100 player that Arkansas's previous staff recruited. His recruitment remains an interesting scenario right now, but he's having a good season so far. But then on a national level, Westminster out of the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area, Alex Constanza played in this event last year with Westminster. They're back in it. He's a 6'8" wing, class of 2026, a top 15 rated 5-star. Arkansas assistant coach Chuck Martin was out to see multiple players at City of Palms last week, including Constanza. He'll be competing out there. Caleb Wilson and Holy Innocents out of the Atlanta area are participating in Keaton Cotton, even though Arkansas is out of the running for Caleb Wilson. At least that's what we've heard that's been the status for a while. I don't see a U-turn on that, but hell, you never know. But he's playing in this event. I'll be checking him out. So there's a lot of good players I'll be seeing through the weekend. Now we're going to move past recruiting. I'm kind of zeroing in on 3 things that stand out for me right now. Arkansas is 10-2, 5 wins in a row, knock off, take care of business at home against a team in Oakland that's really struggling. And you had a perfect December for the 4th time in 4 years, and you're going in to league play the right way. And when I look at the 3 kind of main topic areas, I start with availability, player availability. Because what's the old saying? Availability is the best ability. And I really think this has been not only an obvious question mark game to game to game. Arkansas's not been at full strength for every game. It doesn't mean there hasn't been 2 or 3 games where everybody in the 9 deep has checked in and played a little bit, but they haven't been at full strength. And you've had more games where they haven't had everybody available and guys sitting out. Most recently, it was mostly frontline guys. Most recently, Nelly Davis and out of the backcourt, as Arkansas tried to, in a game, after a week off after defeating UCA and then having 9 more days till Oakland, let Nelly Davis, who was battling a wrist injury that kept him out for 3 weeks leading up to the season, maybe get him some rest and try to get that thing feeling better. So he was out. So to me, this remains an issue for Arkansas is who's available. It looks like Jonas Adu's ramped up and ready to go. It looks like Trevor Brazile, who's had a career of injury, well chronicled at Arkansas now in year 3 and has already missed a couple of games, probably limited in 2 or 3 others with his ailments, starting to really ramp things up. You're seeing other guys starting to feed off that interior presence that those guys are bringing that Big Z simply couldn't. And he's been dealing and missing games or playing limited minutes because of his own injuries. So where things seem to be coming together and gelling and there's more balance, it's all predicated upon guys being available consistently. And Arkansas hasn't had that. We haven't really seen the full 9 rotation consistently getting used to a role and getting used to how are you going to use this personnel package and the other. One of the blessings, if you're going to call it that, with Nelly Davis out in this last game, is Arkansas and Calipari were able to use a lot of big frontline lineups. It seemed like for the longest he made sure he had at least 2 bigs on the court together, and sometimes 3 when you counted Duke Thiero. And so it gave Arkansas a chance to really kind of look at how those matchups could hit. Now, again, it's an inferior opponent, North Carolina A&T, but we saw long stretches of that, which we hadn't seen a lot this season yet. So that was a good thing. And Arkansas did some good stuff there. There was some drop off in some of that, but there was also some positives. When you win a game 95-67, there's not a lot that just jumps out at you that's not really bad, that looks really bad. Most of it was good, but still it was an opportunity to try some different things. But I still think availability at the end of the day is an issue for this team until it's not. And so as an arching, top 3 on my list of what matters most, this is number 1 going into SEC play. Who is going to be available? Does Arkansas continue to struggle with attrition? Because when we go back to the talking points with Calipari's new philosophy, I was always a bit critical and thought of it as a team weakness potentially back in June and July when we were doing these segments. I pointed out several things: lack of depth, especially on the front line. I had question marks about overall physicality outside of Jonas Adu, who missed, who was out for so long, and it was so obvious when Arkansas was playing without him early in the season. That was a big problem. And then 3-point shooting, which has been better maybe than even I thought it might be. Even though that's been up and down, it's gotten better lately, and we'll see if Arkansas is going to be able to carry over into league play. But those were some of the weak spots. But again, lack of roster depth at key positions beyond an 8 or 9. And we always said if there was attrition by way of injury or injuries or illness, we've seen some of that. Duke Thiero missed a game with a fever or played sparingly in another with a fever and sat out another game. There's a portion of this, it's not just about injuries and ailment. There's a feeling about this to me, since you are only 9 deep in a rotation, this sense of maybe there's some load management going on. And we're not going to get official word on some of that. Maybe cryptically, Calipari alludes to it a little bit and suggests he's just giving the guys a little bit of a break that might have been dealing with some nagging stuff. And you'll have fresher legs. You're going to get into the grind of the SEC and you only go 9 deep. Aside from injuries and ailments, it might be a good idea in some sense, in some regard, for guys to have a game or 2 off, and especially when you're loading up and playing a bunch of quad 4 opponents in non-conference. So there may be some value there. I think some other things we talked about, it allows you to look at different personnel groups, sometimes by default. If you've got one guy out or 2 guys out or 1 guy out and another guy limited, it forces you to drill down on what you're doing. Maybe guys that are playing more minutes than what their expected roles would be later, a la Big Z and the 2 freshmen, Carter Knox and Billy Richmond. There's some other value in how you can use your non-conference in those situations to help yourself. But I think another thing are some other things that are kind of out there. Like this has been a self-inflicted self-created turnover team, and you start doing this wonder, you kind of play this. Is this just how this group is going to be, or is there some element of you haven't really had all hands on deck at all times? And is it just that myriad of not a lot of live 5-on-5 scrimmaging, other than when you can do that against GAs, guys not being available, missing extended portions of time? Does that lend itself to why you're not, you're having more self-inflicted wounds maybe than you'd like to have, especially with a mostly veteran group? There's an element of that, in my opinion. So there's a lot of things, but I think once you get into the SEC, when teams, a lot of them are going to be deeper than you, not necessarily in how deep their rotation runs, but in terms of who they can turn to next. If they have an injury, or if they have a guy that's having an off night, or whatever, foul trouble, maybe more quality depth than you have dealing with those same issues. And so that'll be a night in and night out thing. And so I think attrition now becomes even more magnified than it was in the non-conference. To me, that is the biggest thing right now to talk about with this Arkansas team, because you'd rather be talking about, a little dehydrated here, we'd rather be talking about, which we're going to do next, but front and center, how this team seems to be coming together. But again, with guys continuing to miss, you hope there's there's more load management element to it than guys just really not ready, or not fully there physically. Although Calipari says we've got guys that aren't fully there. He says Adu is still trying to get there. But man, he's been really good, especially the last 4 games of this winning streak, when his minutes increased 20 plus each night out, and he's really starting to produce. I think some of the interesting things, it's really incredible to me. This Arkansas team, in some ways, in this 5-game winning streak, the win over Michigan, these tight games playing away from home, just look for that just about every night out, whether you're home or away in the SEC. But it's amazing to me, the 2 guys that came in with Final Four and Elite Eight experience, with preseason All SEC nods. In Nelly Davis's case, preseason watch list for National Player of the Year. It's been 2 other guys that are playing at an all-league level, in Adu Thiero and Boogie Flan, the true freshman point guard, Thiero, the junior 3-4 combo forward. Those guys are playing at an all-conference pace right now. And Jonas Adu, in the body of work in these last 4 games, now that we see him rounding into maybe some playing shape and getting used to now having an increased role, and playing having the kind of impact at both ends that we saw at Tennessee at times. He's not fully there yet, but you've got guys right now playing consistently at all league level, and Jonas Adu maybe being another guy that can get there like he did last year. Nelly Davis, he's nowhere near it right now. And it's not that he's inefficient. He's actually been an efficient shooter, over 46% from the field, almost 39% from 3, just a hair. He was 41% last year at Florida Atlantic, 89% from the free throw line. He's just not been a volume guy. He looked like he was going to be, Arkansas's potentially leading scorer, one of the leading scorers in the SEC, a go-to kind of a guy you could run your offense through, a guy who could go create a shot in the last 4 or 5 minutes of a tight game. And he's mostly offensively been sort of a complementary piece in that backcourt, playing off the ball, benefiting on catch and shoot and getting to spots. Not so much shot creation as it is just taking better shots. It's a low volume so far. The efficiency has gotten better and better to the point where the season numbers look good. But he's averaging 9.2 points per game. Now 10.2 over Arkansas's last 6 games, so ticking up. He did sit out against UCA at his last 6 games, not Arkansas's last 6, because he didn't play against North Carolina A&T. He's a good rebounder from the guard spot. He makes these hustle plays, 50-50 ball plays. It's not like he's been a bust. He just hasn't been on an all SEC level. Jonas Adu, it's more about just not being available with him. And we're seeing more and more of those qualities that give Arkansas a chance to have at least 3 guys that could potentially push for all league recognition. I don't 100% rule out a guy like DJ Wagner, even a Trevor Brazil. I mean, like an all defensive team kind of thing later on. I mean, we'll see, but certainly you've got 2 in Adu Thiero and Boogie Flan. And what I like is, we were talking for so long, those first 7 games in Arkansas started 5-2. if Theo and Flan didn't have monster games, Arkansas was in trouble. Now there's a lot more balance. This last outing, 6 players scored in double figures. 5 got in double figures against UCA. You go back to Miami and Michigan, Arkansas had in both of those games at least 4 players reach double figure scoring. And so you're seeing more and more of how the balance in the front, and it's not just, well, it's the backcourt that's carrying Arkansas in that balance, not so much the front court. I'd actually say the front court stepped up a lot with Jonas Adu and his emergence. And we haven't talked about Brazil. It's almost been in concert. It's almost like those two guys together have raised their level. Again, Adu mostly just getting onto the court, and then Brazil, once he got back, stepping up his game. You're getting a 1-2 punch on that front line that's changed everything for Arkansas in terms of paint presence at both ends, because you're getting a lot of finishes at the rim, and you're seeing more and more games where both Boogie Flan and DJ Wagner are high in assist numbers. And it's because you're effectively got 2 point guards on the court most of the game. Those are your 2 leaders in minutes. They play together, but they're feeding off. They're helping set up Adu and Brazil on these rim runs, whether it's a lob or just hard rolls off some kind of screen action, or some kind of, whether it's on ball in a dribble handoff scenario, or a 2-man game where the guard's involved, or off the ball and the guard's just curling in and seeing them on the backdoor rim run and hitting them with a good pass. And so you're seeing that added dimension of Arkansas being a better team from its front line in the paint, corresponding with the guards, or what's more on the plate for them to be able to serve when they're dishing out these passes. Because it's, it was a thing where when it was Big Z as your anchor on the front line, it's like a 7-2 guard out there. And not that he doesn't bring some good qualities. I mean, he'll block some shots. He's Arkansas's shot blocking leader by percentage. He's still the best 3-point shooter on the team. But it's been mostly a finesse face-up game. Arkansas need to get better on that front line, especially in the paint at both ends. And you're seeing the guards and front court players meshing better together. So it's not just a bunch of random individual pieces that go off here and there. It's starting to feel like guys are starting to get on the same page and understand each other better, which then you hope eventually leads to, as players settle into roles and understanding of each other, maybe starting to shrink down on some of these unforced turnovers. Nelly Davis Boogie Flan averaging 2 turnovers per game. DJ Wagner last year at Kentucky, 1.5 turnovers per game. It's been over 2 most of the season. It's just a hair under that. He's getting a little better taking care of the ball, right at 1.9. You'd like to see, if once you move into league play, can those guys get it closer to 1.5? It's a tall task. They play a lot of minutes. Arkansas likes to play with pace. Boogie Flan, better than a 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. 6.2 assists is second in the SEC. Obviously leads Arkansas. It's top 20 nationally. He's averaging over 15 points per game, Boogie Flan. So he's the only player in the SEC to average at least 12 points and at least 5 assists per game. He's 15-6. So he's blowing that measure out of the water. And really, I go back to Lee Mayberry in the 88-89 season as a freshman on a loaded team. It was sort of that consistent guy, night in and night out. He was going to run your team. He was going to have plenty of assists and set guys up, but he could go off and be your leading scorer, and he was clutch, and he was a good 3-point shooter. Boogie Flan checks all those boxes. High 30s, between 37-38% shooting from 3 on good volume, 84.5%, almost 85% from the free throw line, which ranks top 10 in the SEC. I mentioned some of the other stuff. He's also top 12 in the SEC in steals at 1.8 per game. DJ Wagner, the third Arkansas Razorback in double figures per game, 10.1 points per game, over 3 assists, over 3 rebounds per game, 1.3 steals. That's third on the team. Wagner at 41.5% from 3. Last year at Kentucky, sub 30. Right now, it's no given that he's going to continue this, but 41.5%. And it's just getting better and better as players start to look more comfortable together and buying into roles and understanding what works. and playing to their strengths. And you got to give the coaching staff a lot of credit for that too. But at 41.5% right now, is second on the team behind Big Z. And if he were to maintain that, DJ Wagner, through the end of the season, just at that percentage, he'd finish 18th all time in single season 3-point shooting efficiency at Arkansas. Again, it's too early to say that's where it's headed, but that's what it would be if he did that. So kudos to him for getting better in his 3-point shooting. Again, he needs to get his turnovers down closer to where he was a year ago. I think if he and Boogie Flan, DJ Wagner and Boogie Flan can settle down just a little bit better, more, and taking care of the ball and get somewhere around that 1.5 turnovers per game threshold, with the way that they're assisting in as many minutes as they play and as much they're on the ball, I think it helps Arkansas take another step in terms of shrinking those margins in the turnover game, because that should be a strength for Arkansas defensively, a team that can get steals, get blocks, likes to run off misses and makes, get out in transition. And so the more you can shrink down in that turnover margin, the better. So we moved on from attrition and injuries and those things to now talking about how the front line and backcourt are starting to look a little more balanced, not just in terms of multiple contributors in both backcourt and front court, but how they're playing together, and how they're shoring up things that were really rough spots, I thought, in the first 7 games. And we're really seeing now how Arkansas not only missed Adu and what he brings, but we're missing, to that point, a more locked-in Brazil. This is the most serious basketball I've seen from Brazil. He's playing with better physicality. He's making plays in traffic, where he was very sporadic in those things. At times, he'd flash, because we know he can make wild plays with his physical gifts, that athleticism, the length, and have those double-double games, but they were few and far between. There were the injuries. And then he was matador a lot, just kind of back out. If somebody was challenging him mano a mano, he'd kind of get out of the way. Now he doesn't. There's not as much of that. He's in there ready to fight. And so he may not be the most physical guy out there, but he's playing. It seems to me he's playing a more serious game. He's serious about the job at hand. He's in this last outing, he's been scoring in double figures. These last 5 games in this winning streak, nearly 10 points per game, 9.8. And I think in the last 3 games, he's been in double figures each night out. But he'll knock down the occasional 3. He's not a poor 3-point shooter. He's starting to pick that up a little bit. His drives off the wing. This guy, his strides are long. He's got enough quickness, and he can handle just well enough. And I've watched him catch a wing pass, and then instead of rushing into something that's not there yet, he's been patient, and considering a pass. He's watching how defenders move. And if you give him a crack, he's getting those strides in motor and motion and getting to the rim. And now it's a problem trying to stop him. And so I think Trevor Brazile, he's going to block some shots. He'll alter some shots. He's being a more consistent rebounder of late. That's all you're asking from him, is to apply the gifts, be a higher motor guy more consistently, and then the production will follow. And I think we're seeing that. So in tandem with Adu, I think it's changed a lot for this Arkansas, and perfect timing going into SEC play. Now it's a matter of, do those guys stay healthy? Can they stay on the court? What kind of role does Big Z give you still? He's a guy that reminds me a lot of Connor Vanover, not just because he's a 7+ guy that likes to shoot threes, but both of those players. I used to talk about Connor Vanover in this same light for the longest time. He was a guy that no matter how many minutes he gave you, he could produce. He was a high volume producer in a small amount per minute producer. That's what Big Z can be. He can pass. He can shoot. If you don't rough him up too much around the basket, he's got a nice touch around the rim. We'd like to see more rebounding from him to earn the minutes, and have more of a paint presence. He's also prone to turn it over. I think he's still averaging 2.1 turnovers. Those have come down because he's not playing as many minutes, but he's good for one if he's out there a minute. So you want to see him continue to improve. The youngest player on the front line, he probably will. We haven't talked as much about Thiero. Between 17 and 18 points per game, that leads Arkansas. It's top 10 in the SEC. between 5.5 and 6 rebounds per game. That leads Arkansas. 1.9 steals. That leads Arkansas. His field goal percentage over 61% is second in the SEC, which is outstanding. We know most of that's just getting to the rim. He gets out in transition, off live ball turnovers, in a half court setting. He's going to put his head down and bully ball drive his way to the rim, and several things are going to happen, and most of them are good. He's either going to dunk, lay it in, finish a night. He's got a nice little array of little float shots, 6 feet and in, or he's going to get fouled, and that's where the issue is. He's top 10 in the SEC in both field goals made per game, but also free throws attempted and free throws made per game. The problem is his percentages are in the 60s at the free throw line, and he gets there in such a high volume. You'd like to see that improve and at least get to hovering right around 70 or a little bit better if you can get that out of him and get some improvement there because of the volume of trips he makes to the free throw line. By the way, Trevor Brazile and Avicic both in the 60s in percentage. That's a bit of a problem for a team that already doesn't shoot a lot of free throws. And I have a sense that a lot of these SEC games are going to resemble how Michigan ended and how Miami ended, or how Baylor was a tight game to the very end, in terms of you're down to the last 4 or 5 minutes and could go either way, 1 or 2 possession game. Those things matter. Being better at the free throw line matters. Taking care of the basketball, not having self-inflicted wounds, those things are going to matter in those situations. So it starts with player availability, and then it works its way into these little things, these nuances where Arkansas still struggles in terms of how do they get over the hump in some of these areas. But you had to, first of all, get guys healthy. There's been more of that. And you had to see more than 1 or 2 players carry your team. And if they're not on that night, you're doomed. We're seeing that Arkansas is getting over those thresholds. And we're seeing both ends improvement. There's still some issues defensively with pick and roll, dribble handoff, high screen action. Still some issues getting back in transition defensively. We saw that in the last game. There's other things we could talk about. The three-point shooting, there a lot of games this year, it's been really bad in one half, and you get behind, and then things start coming together in the second half. I don't know when you're not playing quad 4 mid-majors, if you're going to have it, if you're going to be able to be so hot and cold in a game. Although we saw a lot of hot and cold, that was a roller coaster against a good Michigan team, and Arkansas won that game. Made big plays down the stretch in a game where it looked like they might collapse after building an 18-point lead in the second half. So there's a lot of positives going into it. So those are the 2 so far out of my 3 talking points. The first one was availability, attrition. The second part of it was really how is this team coming together? What's working? What are maybe some trouble areas? Moving into once you get into SEC play. And I think the third biggest overview is on this team is it's how do you deal with this SEC? Because when this roster was put together, the individual pieces looked great. It was always going to be a matter of chemistry and keeping guys healthy on a tight rotation. But I don't think anyone envisioned, even though we knew it was going to be a loaded SEC, preseason it was like 8, 9 teams probably with rosters and the coaching and the right mix of stuff that would be instantly tournament worthy. As it turns out right now, it's at least 13 out of 16 teams with a couple of more teams on the bubble. There are 15 SEC teams ranked in the top 62 in NCAA tournament net. South Carolina at 9-3 just won. The only SEC team with 3 losses, just defeated a ranked Clemson team, is hanging out at 84 in net. Arkansas plays on the road at South Carolina in March. Every game in these 18 SEC games is going to be a quad 1 or quad 2 win or loss opportunity. So there are no bad losses. And we've jumped around without even mentioning Arkansas's got to avoid a bad loss against Oakland. That would be a bad loss. The win doesn't help your resume other than avoiding the bad loss. And so it feels a bit like a trap game because of everything on the table in front of Arkansas. Once they get past Oakland, you're coming back from break. Players took a few days off. You've had 9 days between games. On the other side, Oakland's lost 6 in a row. And we're going to get into that matchup here in a little bit. But when we get back to this SEC, I think I'm assuming Arkansas is on a 6-game winning streak going into it. But it's a different landscape than we even imagined it was, thinking 9 teams were going to be worthy of the NCAA tournament. Of course, things can change, and it may not be a 13-bid SEC league. It might be 11 or 12, which is still incredible and wild and unimaginable, especially given the history of the SEC. It's had some great seasons, but nothing like this. And I don't think any conference at this stage, moving in now, as some leagues are already in the league play this late into December, almost turning the page of January, I don't think any conference has been this strong in any particular season as the SEC is. And so it feels like an NBA kind of a gauntlet in terms of, every night out, there's enough studs and enough to go around on each team to beat your ass. And Arkansas has got good players. Things are starting to come together. We just went through a lot of that. There are still some question marks, but this is a different perspective on what Arkansas needs to do. From a resume standpoint, non-conference, there's not much more Arkansas can do now other than avoid a bad loss. There won't be any bad losses in the SEC in terms of quad. Now, if you have several games in quad 1 and quad 2 where you get blown out, those will be viewed as bad losses just a little differently than a quad 3 or quad 4, which there are none of those. It's all quad 1 and quad 2. I've never seen anything like that. When you're talking 18 conference games, doesn't matter who it is. There are no bad loss opportunities in the quad realm. But it's still a different perspective for Arkansas. I think there's going to be at least one team potentially. Will not shock me if there's a team that goes through that could go through the SEC 6-12 and be on the bubble of making the NCAA tournament. A team that won 1 out of 3 league games throughout could be on a bubble. I don't think Arkansas's had the kind of resume in non-conference that Arkansas could be one of those teams. And that's why I come back to what Arkansas is facing in this SEC versus the one we thought just a few weeks ago or months ago they'd be getting into. Arkansas's non-conference resume has 2 things going for it. 3. We mentioned it. No bad losses. And Oakland, got to take care of that or we'll be changing our tune. You have at least one quality win, at least one. You couldn't go 0-3 in those quad 1 games. You've got one quality win. I think the other thing is what it's got going for it is you're 2-2 away from home. Yeah, the Miami game was a quad 3 result. But you're still, in your whole body of work, they're going to look at, they're going to isolate what did you do away from home. And so even though you've got a quad 3 win in there, I think it's still a credit to you that you went away from home and beat another high major opponent on its home court. I think there's value in that. So there are some positives there. But in terms of Arkansas really being able to afford some slippage in how it navigates a brutal SEC, I don't think there's a lot there. I think Arkansas 2 years ago at 8-10 in SEC play did enough work in non-conference, and the net rating was high enough that it was able to survive that, and then won a game in the SEC tournament. Probably was going to make it into the NCAA tournament regardless. But either way, that's a different scenario. It could be an 8-10 would be enough for Arkansas to get in. I'm not saying it wouldn't be. But I am saying, even though this league is even better than it was 2 years ago, because Arkansas's non-conference is not that stellar, I would have some question marks. I think Arkansas is fragile in terms of being on the bubble. They were on the bubble for 2 or 3 weeks in Lenardi's projections. A 10 seed, last 4 bye. Then after beating the Miami and whoever else they played that week, was it Troy? Texas, San Antonio, Arkansas slipped to a last 4 in, play-in 11 seed. Then you beat Michigan and UCA, and the next Lenardi projection had Arkansas as a 9 seed, so just off the bubble. But the resume is not grand, so you're not far away from being a bubble team. When you look, I mentioned all the teams. 15 of the 16 teams ranked in the top 62 in net. Arkansas is at 47. Only LSU and South Carolina are lower. LSU at 62. So Arkansas doesn't have a great net standing. Again, you're going to have a lot of opportunities. Arkansas is going to win its share of games. I think 9-9 and it locks Arkansas into the tournament. I think a 9-9 finish in the SEC. I think Arkansas's got the pieces. If I'm going to say that the Razorbacks have 2 guys that are on an all SEC playing level right now, potentially a third in Adu, not ruling out maybe somebody else like a DJ Wagner or Trevor Brazile. I'm not mentioning Nelly Davis only because he's not even close right now to a second team recognition all league. I mean, something will have to change for me to throw him in the mix there. I think he's capable of it, but I'm not seeing anything near what we projected, even though, again, he's been efficient on low volume and some of those things. I'm generally not scared of anyone in the league. Well, you got to respect everybody in the league. It's not a fear factor of we're not good enough, but it's the idea that there's not a stretch of games where you can say this is where we can stack. This is where we feel good about stacking 2 or 3 wins and then absorbing maybe some trouble areas in some of these road games. Arkansas, you got to remember, I said every game's quad 1 and quad 2. Most of those quad 1 opportunities are on the road. You start out at number 1 and undefeated so far, Tennessee, game 1 in early, January 4th, that's a Saturday. Then you come home and you get Ole Miss, 1 loss, ranked team, Florida, undefeated right now, ranked team, and these are top tier teams in the country. That's your first 3. And we thought, well, that road trip to LSU and Missouri right after that if you're going to have a back-to-backer, that's not that bad. Well, all of these games. So the point is not to be that you shouldn't fear these other teams, but respect the hell out of them. And you can't point to sections of the schedule and say, those should be wins. It's not that simple anymore. You don't have those little 2 or 3 game stretches there where in the past when Arkansas started so poorly in SEC play, they caught a break and had 2 or 3 games against teams that really were kind of mediocre. And Arkansas had a little better talent, better coaching, and you could string together some wins there. I don't think you can point anywhere on the schedule in SEC play and see that kind of a window. Mm-hmm. And so that's the point. And so going back through it again, I think a 9-9 would be enough. Because it's all quad 1 and quad 2, it really wouldn't matter which of those 9. I think that would be enough unless you just only won quad 2s and didn't win any quad 1s at that point. That might be enough to keep you out. But I bet you'd have some quad 1s in there. But a lot of them are going to be road games. I talked about Tennessee, Kentucky, Auburn, Texas A&M. A lot of these quad 1 opportunities, it's just really about Arkansas is going to be on the road for most of those, but they'll have some at home too. Alabama's a big one. We just keep an eye on some of the progress that Arkansas makes out of the gates. Can you have progress on the road against number 1 Tennessee and a loss? Maybe. I'm not into moral victories, but let's see how that plays out. Last time out, Tennessee won the SEC last year. Calipari's Kentucky team finished in a 4-way tie for second place, a game out. And late in the year, I think that Kentucky team went on the road into Knoxville and won a game. Not saying that history is going to repeat itself, but this isn't Calipari's first tough battle. It'll be the toughest SEC he's ever seen, and he's the dean of coaches when you look at his tenure. That's for sure. But I do. I think the SEC, the state of the SEC, is worth mentioning as one of the top 3 overviews of Arkansas' season to this point, because it's a different SEC going into it than we thought it would be. It's even better. And so it brings into the question mark stuff with attrition, availability, and guys improving on areas where the team maybe struggles, and then building on some of the things we're starting to see. How much carryover does that really give you in this, with a league with so much quality, in terms of how it impacts wins and losses? You got to think Arkansas, because I had them as a top 3 or 4 team in preseason projections in the SEC, and a top 10 to 15 ranked team in the country. They're back in the polls, by the way. Razorbacks ranked 23rd. That's good. But right now, because of my question marks and because of how good the SEC is, there's interplay there in terms of trying to project it. I wouldn't say Arkansas's going into it a top 3 or 4 team in the league right now. I'm not saying they can't get there, but everything else was leading up to right now. I see it as a middling team, maybe at the top tier part of middling. So, if there's 16 teams, 7 or 8, 6 through 8 is maybe where you'd feel comfortable based on the body of work and guys being available. As Arkansas continues to build and get better, we can adjust that projection. It's not a prediction. It's just where I see it right now. So everything mattered. The stuff that's played out so far and what you're about to step into, to me, is the best way to kind of put all that together and try to project it. And I think Arkansas might be a middling SEC value right now with a chance to move up on that and the potential to get to that top 3 or 4 range. Because there's 4 teams at least right now that you'd look at this juncture of the season and say, I can see Final Four qualities on that in that team. And Alabama and Auburn, for me, were always going to be in that conversation. They've proven that so far. I think Tennessee's better than I thought they'd be. Number 1 team right now. And a team that finally, got under Rick Barnes, hasn't been great in postseason, got to an Elite 8 last year. And then the other team maybe right now is Florida. I had Florida a little bit higher than most. Florida's making me look good on that. And we'll see. We'll just see if Florida can carry through. Todd Golden, with everything else around him, has done just a great job with the Gators. That team's for real. And then there's some other teams that are knocking on the door. I don't know how good Kentucky is. I don't know how good Oklahoma is. I suspect, it's my gut feeling, is maybe they look a little better right now than they really are. Maybe not. Maybe they have some ups and downs, and we'll see where it settles in March. A&M's a team with a lot of veteran guys and always kind of an enigma to me. They don't always kind of live up to what you think. So I'm not fully sold there. Texas underperforming with good players, a great freshman. The league's just loaded. We talked about Boogie Flan. There's other great freshmen in this league. Trey Johnson, Jeremiah Fears. There's other ones. It's just a stacked league when you look at it from a portal value standpoint. The best high school players, and it's translating to this level. It's just a loaded deck. And I think Arkansas, again, if I was being honest about it, which I am, going into it, I've got Arkansas kind of middling, but with the chance to get closer to that top 3 or 4. But again, if with 4 teams I see as a Final Four value right now, potentially, I don't have Arkansas in that mix, which pushes them out of the top 4 right now. I could see this Arkansas team, based on the way it is now, if all things come together based on everyone's strengths and weaknesses that we've seen so far, I would say it's a team that can make a run past the first weekend. But because Nelly Davis isn't quite what I thought he was going to be in terms of a go-to kind of a guy, a volume kind of score guy, I think Arkansas has one of those right now. That's Boogie Fland as a true freshman. I think DJ Wagner's probably Arkansas's second best shot creator. And for a guy that's, a 10 to probably at best 11 and a half, 12 points per game score. I don't know if that's enough for you to call yourself, to have enough to call yourself a Final Four piece. I don't know potential. I don't know that Nelly gets there to help Arkansas get there. I see Thiero, even though he's putting up those numbers, as more of an opportunistic type of scorer, not a real shot creator and a guy you want the ball in his hands a lot, especially at the close of games. Not trying to diminish the player, but he's been outstanding. He's been on another level. He's just not that guy, in my opinion. So if I don't see Arkansas having all the pieces, the way it's played out so far, to be a Final Four team, what's it going to take for them to get there? I'm not saying they can't, that it's impossible. I just don't have a vision for that. All right, so we're almost an hour in. Going to wrap things up with just saying this is not a good Oakland team. Just a quick preview here. 4 players averaging in double figures, 2 undersized forwards in terms of height, a couple of 6'6" guys. One of them goes 239, the other one 247. They've got that Kamani Johnson feel in terms of, being able to carve out space just by throwing their bodies around. And good players, a couple of guards that are averaging double figures. Not a good 3-point shooting team, not a good free throw shooting team, not a good overall shooting team, a team that averages in the mid-60s, 6 straight losses. But they fought in a lot of games. They had an overtime loss in their last outing. They've been in Hawaii for their last 3 games just this week, just getting back probably today. This will be the 7th game. Let me count that up. And it'll be the 6th game for Oakland when they play on Monday since December 17th. So in a 13-day span, they'll have played their 6th game, including 3 in Hawaii and all that travel. Whereas Arkansas, in the same span, this will only be their 2nd game. But it feels like a trap game with guys just getting back. maybe being a little rusty. You don't know everybody's attention level to detail. They're playing at home. Maybe you're a little relaxed. You're on a winning streak. Oakland's got nothing to lose except another game. I guess they're seventh in a row. Not a great team, but one of the things I notice is their offense, or excuse me, defensively, when they're in man to man, there's a lot of zone principle. And when they're in zone, there's a lot of man principle. It's almost hard to tell if they're in a man or a zone sometimes. And they do it, and instead of like traditional gap coverage, they move players into spaces and areas where sometimes they'll let a gap go based on the momentum of the offensive player on the ball and which direction he's going in. So they kind of read body language in the way that they defend and how they get to spots. It's a little interesting sometimes. They've not been very good. They're defensively, they're not great. The one thing this team does, it doesn't foul a lot. Arkansas doesn't shoot a lot of free throws anyway. It doesn't turn the ball over a lot. That should be a strength of Arkansas. Most games is getting out, forcing those live ball turnovers, getting out in transition. It's a team averaging less than 11 rebounds a game. Decent on the offensive glass, 12 boards a game. So there's a conflict there. The Razorbacks are holding teams, I think, just below 8 offensive rebounds per game. But overall, just not a good Oakland team. I expect Arkansas to take care of business. We know the history last year with the upset win for Oakland in the NCAA tournament. Different season, different scenario. Arkansas's at home. I fully expect Arkansas to take care of business, finish out the month 6-0 for December, the first unbeaten. Arkansas is not making the NCAA tournament. I think Arkansas is going to make the NCAA tournament based on what I see now, but they're not far from being right back on the bubble. We went through most of it. I kind of stammered and stumbled around it a little bit, trying to express my thought that while I don't see this as as a team that's on a mission right now, it's not to say that they can't be a really good team and one of the top 4 or 5 teams in the SEC once we start to, or if we can see players available and the trends continue. I could definitely see that, but I can't project it or predict it right now. It's safer to go with what the eye test has shown me so far, with several question marks still out there, and knowing how good this SEC team is, even relative to what we thought a few weeks ago. It's safer to think maybe a 7-9 range, sort of a middling in that middle pack, with a great shot to get an at-large bid. And if I was again projecting a record, I would say right now 9-9 with an upshot for an 11-7, a 12-6 in this league might be good enough for second place. And there may even be a scenario where teams just beat each other up. I still think an Auburn or an Alabama or somebody, even Tennessee, is going to find a way to maybe limit it to 4 losses. It may be more likely that the SEC champion this year has 5. And I think Arkansas, I think if everything falls into place based on what I've seen so far, it's probably 12-6 is probably your ceiling right now. That's not to say that couldn't change again for the better. And again, 9-9 feels about, based on the body of work to this point, and with those question marks looming, maybe more fair. Again, you got to take care of business against Oakland and avoid that. And I think Arkansas will take care of business. All right, an hour and 3 minutes in, y'all know whenever in my mind I've got this thinking I'm going to go 35, 40 minutes, I'd almost double it each time. And before I leave, I want to say again, thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. Please hit subscribe, like, and share if you haven't done it already. And I want to say just a few words about Josh Claxon, a young man at 27 years old who lost his life a week ago, student manager for the Little Rock Trojans basketball program. Josh was also with the Razorbacks basketball program, a manager there. And I've known Josh for years because he's one of my son's best friends. I mean, you know how young men are, man. They got their crew. They got their running guys. And Josh was one of those for my son. He was one of his main guys. He called him his brother. My son has 2 sisters. I have 3 kids, 2 daughters. He's the middle child, a son, and he's got a few of his boys he refers to as brothers. And Josh Claxon was one of those. Both 27 years old. Josh lost his life in a car accident. It was just over at our house about 3 weeks ago, hanging out, spent the night over here. Friends were over. And I see Josh all the time. I cover Little Rock Trojans. I see him there. Saw him at the Arkansas games a few years ago. He and my son were at school at the U of A at the same time. Just a lot of connectivity there. Josh, funny young man, great sense of humor, witty. Loved basketball. He played high school basketball. I covered his younger brother Seth when he was with Justice Hill at Little Rock Christian Academy after Josh was finished playing. And so his siblings, he's got they love sports. And Josh wanted to work his way up and eventually someday be a coach. Wanted to stick with hoops. Loved hoops. Well, I can relate to that. And so, every game I ever went to, if I didn't see him first and say hello first, he made sure to, if he saw me, to do that. And just one of those, everybody, there were no strangers around Josh. He interacted with everybody. Daryl Walker, the head coach, former Arkansas great and head coach of Little Rock Trojans, put out a really nice message about Josh, saying how hard he worked and how everybody loved him. And that's what I saw. Everybody loved Josh, including my son, still loves him. Monday, the day that Arkansas plays Oakland later, that morning, visitation services here in the Little Rock area, and his funeral. And we're mourning his loss. We love Josh. We're thinking about his family. We've prayed for his family. We know that's not easy, especially over the holidays. And we've had our struggles with it. It's really, really hard to talk about. I've gotten the strength to do it, but I miss him, and I'll miss him. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, we'll see you then.